Hi, everyone. Welcome to our final sustainability seminar of this academic year, focused on sustainable agriculture. We're going to be exploring solutions on how to make global agricultural systems more environmentally and socially sustainable. So this seminar in particular will examine key challenges such as pesticide use, global supply chains, and corporate influence, while also highlighting community-led and grassroots approaches to sustainable farming. So I will be chairing today's seminar, so I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Adithi, and I'm a final year international relations student here at King's, and I'm also the Sustainability Education Assistant with King's Climate and Sustainability. I also volunteer as the Communications and Fundraising Manager with Thriving Youth Farmers Uganda, which is a grassroots NGO. One of our speakers, Allie, also volunteers at, but you'll hear more about this shortly. I will soon hand over to today's incredible speakers, but before that, just a reminder of some quick ground rules. Please do keep your mics off when you're not speaking, and if you'd like to ask a question, please type it in the chat, or you could wait until the Q&A section at the end to raise your hand and then unmute and ask the question. Please also do note that we are recording this session. This seminar series is also linked to the key Sustainability and Climate module, which is a fully co-created, open access, and interdisciplinary module covering the biggest topics in sustainability, from climate change and food to sustainable finance and even social justice. If you're a King's staff or student and you haven't enrolled yet, we would encourage you to check it out, and we will now share the link in the chat. Okay, we are now going to start the seminar with the presentations of our speakers and then finish with the Q&A. You can ask your questions anytime in the chat and we will go through them. So firstly, I'm honored to introduce Rajan Bhopal, who is a project manager at Pesticide Action Network, specializing in sustainable agricultural value chains and agrochemical policy. He also leads initiatives to reduce pesticide use and promote agroecology in global cotton, cocoa, and coffee supply chains. Rajan brings agricultural and practical expertise in supporting smallholder farms adopt sustainable practices in East and West Africa, and also in conducting studies on the impact of pesticide poisoning on farmers and farm workers. So on to you, Rajan, if you'd like to start your presentation.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that introduction. So I realized, having prepared my presentation, I'd better start with an introduction into what pesticides are, because that's going to be the topic of this conversation. Now, pesticides are chemical or biological agents, chemicals typically that are designed to kill, repel, or control pests. And those can be insect pests, those can also be weeds, fungi, rodents, or other organisms that otherwise interfere with our agricultural or our landscape, whatever it is that humans want from our landscape. And Pesticide Action Network was founded in Malaysia in 1982, 44 years ago, and then in the UK 40 years ago, in response to the severe harms that the advent and the explosion of pesticide use was having on global health and global environment. There are approximately 385 million cases of unintentional acute pesticide poisoning every single year. And that's roughly 2/5 of all farmers and farm workers who are facing acute pesticide poisoning. So that's immediate health impacts. It's estimated to be around 168,000 deaths caused by pesticides each year. And in total, more than 17 million pesticide suicides since the Green Revolution. Beyond these obvious health impacts, there are also severe environmental impacts going on in the world that's linked to the use of pesticides. There's been a more than 75% decline. One study showed 75% decline in insect biomass in protected areas. So this is not even where pesticides are being sprayed, but they're having very large impacts throughout the whole world and beyond their place of application. So I've given a brief introduction to Pesticide Action Network UK. Our goals are to eliminate highly hazardous pesticides, to reduce dependence on pesticides and promote ecologically sound as well as socially just alternatives for pest control. I wanted to talk about the health and environmental impacts first, and this is basically showing a distribution of where these non-fatal acute poisonings are happening. You can see that they're very concentrated in in Asia. About 2/3 of the cases are in Asia, and about 1/3 of the cases are occurring in Africa. So much more than that, but it's a clear concentration in the kind of global south. And diving into this a bit deeper, I've already mentioned around 2/5. This is a pan estimate of how many people are affected by pesticide poisoning a year. The symptoms can range from temporary or mild effects that come on within minutes or hours or within a day or two of exposure to the pesticides. And it can be mild, it can be things like headaches or nausea, but it can also be very severe chemical burns, even blindness, seizures. These things are incredibly common in many countries. But what's much harder to assess are the long-term impacts. So some of the chronic effects, meaning when you're exposed repeatedly to pesticides, we know that they can contribute to cancer, they can affect the reproductive system, harm the unborn child, and result in life-changing damage. One pesticide in particular, paraquat, is linked to Parkinson's disease, for example. That's one of the reasons why it's banned in the UK, despite being used very widely elsewhere. One stat here is that the UN Environment Programme estimated the health costs alone from pesticides at being $97 billion in Africa in a 15-year period. So you can see that they're having serious effects on people and also affecting economics. Briefly on environmental impacts. We know that pesticides can harm, in fact, they're basically designed to harm wildlife, and they're unusual as a pollutant in that they're released into the environment purposefully. They have many negative impacts on, for example, on pollinators, including honeybees, but what people may not be so familiar with is that they also affect the plant predators of the pests that are in the environment. So they affect generally the ecosystem services, what we rely on from nature. They're having a very substantial effect. And what this graph, I won't be able to talk about it in detail, but what we're seeing in this image is the visual representation of a study that compared organic fields versus conventionally managed fields, that's with pesticides. And what we found was, what the researchers found was that the pest population in the conventionally managed field was far higher, and the species diversity in the organic field was so rich, it was 5 to 10 times higher, and that was keeping the pests in check naturally. And this is something that we see worldwide. Unfortunately, pesticide use is growing worldwide. Well, in Europe and the US, it's fairly static, but in places like the Americas, in South America, where there is the largest region of pesticide use now, that's actually been growing rapidly over the last. I actually can't read it here, but about over this period, is more than doubled. We're also seeing rapid rate rises in Africa, even Australia, despite having a lower starting point. So this is just giving you a sense of where pesticides are applied, but the usage doesn't necessarily tell us exactly about the impacts, although actually what we're finding is that it's a reasonable proxy. There have been a lot of attempts to estimate the environmental toxicity, and this is something that just came out this year, was that, in fact, just a couple of months ago, quite a shocking statistic. On the left-hand side, what we're seeing is the environmental toxicity using a measure called the total applied toxicity, which has been developed for the UN, seeing almost all species categories are seeing substantial rises in toxicity. And this is over just a 6-year period. between 2013 and 2019. I mean, this is actually, I can't really set it up. I mean, it really surprised me to see this. It just came out a couple of months ago. And on the right-hand side from the same study, we see where this toxicity is concentrated. And there's a similarity to the chart before. The US, the Americas, Brazil, a bit in Europe, and then in Asia. And we're also seeing some levels of concentration in certain parts of Africa, although on the whole, much lower levels. So just briefly, there are economic costs from the reliance on pesticides. They're generally expensive. They can take up a significant amount of revenue for farmers, and the cost of for example, here insecticides since 2020 have gone up by on average 46%. This is reflective of most pesticides are made from fossil fuels. As fuel prices have risen, as we're facing these major periods of global instability, the price of these chemically derived inputs has shot up. Indirect costs of pesticides are also very high. So governments have to set up systems for regulation, enforcement, testing of pesticides. And when they find that their exports are not meeting the residue limits set by importing countries, such as all countries will have residue limits, it can be extremely expensive because those products will be rejected. I wanted to touch briefly on one of the major reasons why it is that we're in this kind of situation, and this is that Share Action themselves, which is an organization trying to make change through the financial system. They say the world's largest pesticide producing companies dominate the system, promoting destructive food production practices and hindering efforts from scientists and policymakers to bring about change. Industry has a huge influence here, and their influence is leading to a lack of independent research in this space. Researchers are often pressed down on when they speak against this model. It also leads to slow and very weak regulation in many countries, and a continuation of the harms of pesticides beyond. There's a lot of efforts to keep pesticides on the market beyond when they should be taken out. One example of that is this double standard. In the EU and the UK, we still permit the export of pesticides that are banned in our own countries. And in many cases, we export pesticides that are then used on crops that are re-imported. There's a real double standard. We're banning them because of severe environmental or health impacts. And this practice is actually increasing, despite there being legislation, despite the EU promising to bring in legislation, but it's not. And there's one example for our UK, for everyone based in the UK, including me, which is that we still produce a pesticide, paraquat, where just a few milligrams is enough to kill. There's no antidote. It's one of the worst pesticides implicated in pesticide suicides. It's still being manufactured in Huddersfield and exported all around the world. But it's not all doom and gloom. There are very effective solutions that are in place and have wide acceptance, ranging from wide acceptance up to good traction. So one example of this is integrated pest management, and another is going further than that, agroecology. And instead of relying on synthetic pesticides to control pests, these agroecological farming nurtures the biological systems that naturally would keep your pests or weeds in check. So when applying these ecologically based principles, you rely on, there are many different techniques that you can adopt, but there is basically a pyramid. You can take it as, if you start with prevention, you move up through cultural, biological measures before you get to biologically derived pesticides. And only as a last resort will you use synthetic pesticides. And through this, farmers massively reduce their cost of production. reduce the harms to human health and the environment, and they also can manage the very common instances of pesticide resistance, pest resistance to the products. The potential for agroecology is huge. A UN report in the 2000s concluded that food production could be doubled through agroecology, that it actually was most advantageous for people in the poorest areas of the world. And this was backed up by evidence showing from the Essex University showing doubling roughly of production, as well as there's been many studies showing higher levels of resilience for farmers who are using agroecological approaches. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the projects that we have, and I want to emphasize this, that this is basically lower tech, but it doesn't mean no tech, and it is also high knowledge. So one example of this is the food spray technique, and this is a technique that was developed by Plan UK and researchers in Australia alongside farmers in Benin, where you apply something into the field, it attracts and then also retains, it provides a little bit of food for beneficial predatory insects. And it can be made using locally derived materials. Now, this is quite a helpful example to see what this might look like in practice. So what you can see in the image is basically, this is not a monocrop. This is a diversified landscape with border crops that provided habitat for these natural enemies. And then these tools, this is a biological approach, this can be applied and work very well in this system. This is one of the tools that's enabled farmers in Benin to adopt organic farming. And they actually they've maintained their yields while reducing or even improved them while significantly reducing costs, leading to actually close to doubling of their profits. It's even higher than it was showed on the screen here. Some of the work that PAN has been involved with includes global UN frameworks and that address the triple planetary crisis. One of these that you may not be aware of is called the Global Framework on Chemicals, and that has set a clear commitment for the phase out of the most highly hazardous pesticides, which are a category of the most toxic pesticides, as well as increased government support for agroecology and IPM. The Global Biodiversity Framework has called for a 50% reduction in pesticide risk, and that links to that slide on toxicity that I showed you earlier. And it is being reflected also in the climate convention as well. So there's growing attention and recognition of the overlap and the role of agriculture and the need to reduce pesticides in order to stay within our planetary limits. I think I wanted to give a very brief example from this is now looking much more at a local level that we see, but it is reflective of what we see also in kind of various different contexts. It was our pesticide-free towns campaign. So this is looking at amenity use of pesticides. It was inspired by initiatives in France, across Europe, where cities and even countries have phased out the use of non-agricultural pesticides. There's been a complete ban on non-agricultural pesticides in France. Now we've got to a place where 2/3 of people in the UK agree that schools and playgrounds and other public spaces should be in their local area should be pesticide free, and 45% of councils are taking action to end or reduce their use of pesticides. So this is something this is driven by local campaigners all across the country who are pushing for action in their local area. I will close with this quote from Rachel Carson, which was in 1960. It is ironic to think that man might determine his own future by something so seemingly trivial as the choice of an insect spray. I would say that the global pesticide problem is not inevitable. It's not driven by agricultural necessity, but it is a systemic failure that's rooted in policy failures and also when we've allowed profit motives to kind of take over decision making. So as researchers, students, potentially advocates, you can contribute through research, through policy analysis, through building awareness, and kind of getting involved in advocacy initiatives. And there's also some links on the screen here that you can use to follow our work a bit more closely. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rajan. There was some really interesting statistics there, and I have a few questions of my own as well. If I'm curious if anyone else has any questions, please do add them to the chat, and we'll go through them in the Q&A section. But next, I'm honored to introduce Selina Pukunju, who is the Senior Program Manager at Better Cotton Initiative in India, and she leads the Better Cotton Field Program. And before joining the BCI, she worked with labor rights organizations focused on advancing workers' rights. She also holds a master's degree in economics and a postgraduate diploma in labor law. She will now share how a sustainable cotton production program can make a real difference in rural communities by building farmer capacity. And her session was also explore what it takes to drive change at scale. So over to you, Selina.
Thank you, Adithi. And thank you, King's College London, for inviting me to share my experience. And thank you, Rajan, for that fantastic presentation. It's actually a fantastic segue to what I want to speak about. Could you please change the slides? Oh, hey, let me see if I can take control. Yes,
Yeah, you should be able to take control.
Yeah, so Better Cotton is basically the world's biggest sustainability initiative in cotton. We work in nearly 30 countries, and about a quarter of cotton traded in the world is actually produced under Better Cotton systems. So this is a brief about who we are, and I will basically talk about the work we do in India and the context within which we work in India, and I'll also touch upon some of the, some of the concepts which Rajan shared. How do we, as an agency working with farmers in the field, how do we implement those? And maybe touch upon those also a little bit. So, yeah, like I said, I will definitely talk about the Indian agrarian context, because without that context, whatever I'm going to say will just be, it won't be actually as useful as should be. Can you actually hear me and see the slides? I am not able to. Adithi?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Okay. So,
are you struggling to?
I am struggling to actually change the slide. Okay. So, first of all, Indian Extension Service, public extension service, is chronically weak. Why I say that is that government's own recognition is that, to have an effective extension service system, you have to have, for 750 farmers, you have to have one extension workers. We don't have that. And again, there are about 200,000 sanctioned positions within the government extension systems, but about a third of those positions are vacant. So the public extension service is actually very, very weak in India. So this lack of public extension service, or lack of a strong public extension service, is actually filled by private extension service providers. Cotton good service providers, because they are driven by profit, like Rajan had actually mentioned, and also driven by the need to actually sell inputs to make their profit. So this is currently the system within which we work in India. And not only us, not only Better Cotton, any agency which is actually working with farmers, be it foundations, or be it university, all of us are working within this system. And then what Rajan mentioned, the double standard of some of the pesticide, global pesticide companies. So whatever is actually banned in Europe is still sold in India, produced and sold in India, imported to India. And here, mostly it's pesticide, highly hazardous pesticides. The example which Rajan mentioned, paraquat, and this is even now sold in India. It's banned all over Europe, almost all over Europe, and banned in China. It's still sold in India. And the same story is with seeds. Mostly we have a very vibrant local seed producing companies. But at the same time, multinational companies are also very much part of the production system. So substandard seeds are produced and very, very actively promoted along with pesticide to farmers. I mean, we have examples where one company, means two subsidiaries of one multinational company, they produce one subsidiary produce the seed, which is cottonseed I'm talking about, the seed which will actually, the plant, when it grows very vigorously. There is a lot of leaves. There is vegetative growth is very, very vibrant. And the pesticide company owned by the same parent company then sells a substance which farmers can actually spray on the plant to regulate the growth. So it's basically, whichever way the pesticide companies are making money. So this is again part of the extension system. They work, they promote pesticides, they promote certain seeds very, very actively in villages. So and then Indian farmers, most of the agricultural households are in serious debt. About if let's say 700 pound is their annual income. This is not a hypothetical number. 77,000 Indian rupees is the annual income of agriculture household, and 61% of that is 61% of this household's income is they are in debt. So this is that leaves you with very, very little investment capital. So are you going to service the debt, or are you actually going to make improvements in the land? So this is the situation under which farmers are operating in India. Next, I'm struggling, Adithi, to move the slides. Would you please help me with that?
Would you like me to take control and you can just tell me when to move?
Yes, yeah, okay. I think, yeah, that'll be better, yeah. Then in general, I think it's not an Indian problem. Across South Asia, and I think across Asia, there is a general lack of recognition of women as farmers. So this is the general context, maybe specific to India to some level, but then the rest of the increasing climate risk and increasing cost of production, and just move the slide, please. Yeah. Depleting quality of soil and water, generally natural resources. If you're using that amount of pesticide, which Rajan had mentioned, in India actually sold in 24-25 season, 677,000 metric ton of chemical pesticide in India. So that was what was sold actually to farmers. And all of that is, in our environment, it is actually leaching to our soil, to our water, and making our people sick. And again, this is possibly a problem in most of the developing countries, marginal land, fragmented land holdings, and rainfed farming is also a major issue in the country. And then again, now we are talking about farmers. To make cotton production, or to produce any sort of to produce anything, you need workers. In India, in the agriculture sector, there are no organized workers. Most of the workers are unorganized, and they're working on a daily wage basis and completely unorganized, actually, and mostly predominantly women workers. There also, again, recognition of women workers is also very, very limited. So why this is important is that when it comes to the harmful impact of pesticides, harmful impact of chemical fertilizers, men and women, their bodies actually respond very differently. So you do also need different sort of interventions and different sort of support for different genders. So this is actually one reason why we highlight that difference. Then what do we do in India, like as Better Cotton Initiative? So the numbers you're seeing on the slide are actually from last year, our reach, and we have worked with 910,000 farmers in India, and most of our farmers have marginal land holdings. So it's about 1.5 hectare land. Of these farmers, 10% were women, And we have also worked with 368,000 workers and total area of 1.5 million. Here, farmers grow cotton during the monsoon season, and those farmers who have water, they do grow another crop between two cotton seasons. If you don't have water, then you basically keep the land fallow and then grow cotton again next season. Why do they grow cotton? I mean, we are, of course, a cotton sustainability standard. So we do have, one could argue that we do have an interest in cotton. Of course, we have an interest in cotton, but we do not promote that farmers will have to grow cotton. Our argument is that you need to diversify your production system, because this is to make yourself resilient against various shocks. Diversify. If you grow cotton, there is a better system to grow cotton. So learn that. So basically, this is our pitch with farmers. And our scale in India, we work in 77 Indian districts and also through 14 program partners, different agencies, local agencies working in these districts with us. We train them, and they then go and train through their extension workers, train farmers. So the ideal ratio of the government, 750 farmers per one extension worker. We do have, actually much stronger ratio. We are currently operating with one extension worker. We have 350 farmers. We are supporting 350 farmers. So, yeah, we can see actually the difference. And in India, we also, to manage this, where do we get the resources actually? In India, Better Cotton itself invests around 13 million euros in the field through the implementing agencies. And then that money crowds in another 10 million euros. So total investment in the field is about 23 million euros. So this is the scale of the project. And now I'll maybe talk a little bit about the impact of the project. So far, the numbers you see here is from 2019-20 season to 24-25 season. We have seen a 7% increase in the yield of cotton and a 23% increase in profit, and 20% decrease in water for irrigation for cotton, and 11% decrease in synthetic fertilizer use, and a 35% decrease in the use of pesticides. Next, Adithi. So here you can see how the pesticide usage had changed over time from 2016-17 to 24-25 season. Highly hazardous pesticides, the usage has actually decreased substantially. This is from percentage of farmers, 50% of farmers were using in 16-17, it had now come down to 8%. And the next number is not very relevant. It's actually our administrative unit. Of that, 94% of the farmers were using, 94% of the groups were using. That had now come down to 59%. I think what is important here is that we have made some major achievement in pesticide, highly hazardous pesticide use reduction in Better Cotton villages, BCA villages. Next slide, Adithi. Thank you. So here you can see how the pesticide usage had changed. Not all pesticide is actually the same. Like Rajan said, there are some which an ml of that can actually kill a human being, whereas some others are slightly less toxic, but all of those are toxic. We are using it because it is toxic and it is killing. It is designed to kill. Yeah. So all of it is toxic, some are less toxic. So how has it changed for Better Cotton? You can see that the usage of the pesticide actually had come down per hectare, 1 liter to 0.36 liters over the last nearly 10 years. Next slide, please. Then when we talk about the impact of Better Cotton on soil, the farmers who are working with us from 18-19 season, 29% of them were using organic fertilizers, and now nearly 50% of our farmers are using organic fertilizers in the season which just passed. And you can see the synthetic fertilizer usage reduction, and especially the reduction in usage of nitrogen in amongst better cotton farmers here. Next slide, please. Here, generally the myth in the sector is that cotton is a water guzzling crop. Cotton takes a lot of water. Our experience is very different. Cotton does, of course, need water like any other crop. To germinate, it needs water, and to sustain, it needs some water. But our experience is that cotton needs maybe 4 irrigation throughout the 6 months it is actually standing. And if you can give more water, at times it behaves better, but at times more water actually means that the crop is damaged. I mean, the yield is, crop is not damaged, but the yield is actually less because you're giving water at a time when the crop is focusing on maturing the balls, maturing the lint. Then you're giving water. That means crop suddenly thinks that, okay, now I have to actually start growing. I mean, I have to focus on vegetative growth. So cotton responds well to water in general, but our experience is that wherever there is water, farmers actually shift to paddy or some other crops. They grow cotton when they don't have access to assured water throughout the season. So here we have part of one of the major interventions Better Cotton does is to train farmers on actual judicious water management on the field, and also supporting them in strengthening the water sources in and around the field, and collective action when it comes to water stewardship. So here you can see that over the last 9 seasons, the water usage had come down per metric ton lint, 1942 to 1315 cubic meter of water. So this is per metric ton lint. Adithi, next slide, please. So here is the profitability of better cotton farmers, and you can see that profitability has increased. And here again, the cost of production has substantially increased, disproportionately increased. So the increase in profitability is not that substantial, but still for better cotton farmers, it has increased. And here you can see that almost all those green is basically the cost of labor for cotton production. That has been substantial. That's actually also increasing in India. Next. Yeah, here you do see that the emission intensity of average emission intensity of better cotton, that's 4.08 ton carbon dioxide equivalent per ton of lint, and this is in fact 1082 kilogram less than the national average. So we have made substantial progress there, and this is mostly coming from reduced fertilizer usage and fertilizer application. Next slide, Adithi. And here you see the average yield difference between better cotton farmer and BCA farmer and non-BCA farmer, and how has it actually over the last years changed. So Indian average currently is 453 kilogram per hectare, whereas BCI India average is 701 kilogram per hectare. And that had when the national average had changed only 4 kilograms over the last 3 seasons, whereas India average for BCI has changed, increased by 51 kilograms. So you can see a substantial difference in the yield. And this is, again, this in some ways actually break the myth which the pesticide companies have been promoting, or agro-input companies have been promoting all over the world, that if you reduce the use of agro-inputs, the yield will be affected. It is actually not true. And there may be a minor difference in yield, minor reduction in the yield in the beginning, but over the period of time, yield actually increases. This is our experience, and Rajan can vouch for that this is the experience of rest of the world too. But the narrative you will read is that you reduce the input usage, the pesticide, the yield is going to be less. This is not true. Next, please. What is it that you can do? It's actually very, very simple, commonsensical that as consumers, just start asking critical questions. Where is what I'm consuming coming from? First of all, also, is this consumption necessary? Like, I mean, why do I need a seventh pair of jeans? So that's a question we should be asking. And then if you must buy, where is it coming from? What sort of, who were the stakeholders involved in the production? What sort of process was involved? And has it actually made the lives of people involved better? Has it made the environment worse? And these are some of the questions you can ask. And then again, like, sensible, responsible human beings, we should use our skills and knowledge to start asking questions to power. It's not only to yourself you're asking questions, and see how you can reshape the global value chain for most of the commodities we are using. I think that's all I have to say. If you have any questions, we can take it later. Adithi.
Thanks so much, Selena. That was great. I'm now really pleased to welcome our very own Amanda, who's a lecturer in development policy and practice at King's. She has over 10 years of policy and research experience in the development sector and has also carried out research in Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, Ghana, Indonesia, Kenya, and Tanzania, focusing specifically on poverty, social exclusion, and inequality. So over to you, Amanda.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to bring up my presentation. There we go. Well, I think, am I sharing my presentation? Or am I sharing the same window to back?
Yeah, we can only see the Teams page.
Okay. There we go. Okay, I think that's up there now. Yep.
Yeah.
Great. So hi everyone. Thanks a lot for having me. It's so nice to be having this this discussion today. So as Adithi mentioned, I'm a lecturer here at King's College, and here at King's College, I founded a new social enterprise called NAIRA. So what I'm going to be talking about today, what I'm going to do is actually pose a bit of a bigger question to the group. And then I'm going to talk about the initiative that I'm working on and how it responds to that question. I just realized, sorry, that I'm probably not showing a presenter view. Just fix that if I can. Oh, slideshow, here we go. Okay. So I've put up this concept of carbon negative agriculture, and that brings me to the sort of bigger framing question that I wanted to pose. And like I said, I'm going to give a response to this question that I and my team are working on, but I'd be really interested to hear what other people think about this question when we come into the Q&A. So the question is, can food give back more to the environment than it takes? And I think, so the first two presentations that we've just heard from really kind of bring home the message that agriculture can be quite damaging, particularly with regards to pesticides. And as you've just mentioned, in terms of chemical fertilizer, I've heard the terms of monocropping, etc. I think everyone in this room probably knows many of the different facets in which agriculture can be damaging. And I'm really interested to know if it can give back to the environment. We're talking about natural processes that have the potential to contribute positively to the environment. So that's what I'm going to be exploring today. But like I said, I'd be really interested to come back to this in the discussion if we have time. So I'm going to zoom in on some of the challenges that I've been working on in some of my research and how it then has led me to this new initiative called NAIRA. The number one challenge, and this has been touched on already in both presentations, but earlier presentations, but we have a lot of evidence that farmers, particularly in low and middle income countries, I don't work so much on high income countries. I'd be interested in the comparison to the UK context from Rajan's presentation, but farmers in low and middle income countries typically want to adopt climate smart practices. They are confronted by the climate crisis. I've been sort of working in this area for around 15 to 20 years, and I think I've seen like a real kind of uptick in awareness and motivation to do something in response to climate change in the context that I work in. But really fundamentally, farmers lack the resources to do so. And I think this has come up again in both presentations, is just the real strain, financial and also labor strain that farmers are under. And so we can provide training and we can provide, sort of information on best practices. But if farmers don't have spare labor, which who does, or financial resources, they really struggle to take up practices that they may know are better for their production. I'm also interested in the fact that people in high income countries want to also do something to perhaps mitigate the climate crisis, because many of them aren't in a position to aren't necessarily adapting just yet. But many of the options that are available to them are costly, or they require them to avoid things that they find pleasurable or convenient. So in the context of food, maybe it's stopping buying things that you might enjoy. And in some cases that might be necessary, but I raised the question, is there a way to do this that we can all still enjoy a little bit? Particularly in the context of agriculture and food, I think, we all covet so many of the things that we consume very, very highly, and could be even culturally relevant. And so maybe it's not all about giving up, particularly in the context of food. And the third point that I want to touch on, and where the intervention that I'm about to talk about tries to intervene, is that the extent of the climate crisis, at least from my personal experience, but also based on some of the initial market research that we've been doing for this initiative, has left a lot of people hopeless. The gravity of the problem is, rising, and we're not seeing the kind of shift in the tide that we need. And at the same time, greenwashing and initiatives that promise a lot and deliver very little leaves us all a bit confused about what we can do, what kind of, actions will really result in meaningful change. So these are the three problems that I'm interested in, and that the initiative that I'm about to talk about is trying to tackle. So I mentioned that I've been, over the last year or so, leading a new initiative called NIRA. Our tagline is "From the Ground Up." And basically, I think in the context of our discussion, we can see this as a value chain intervention. We're trying to basically collapse value chains so that products that we all consume and enjoy can actually be climate negative, so that they can capture more carbon. We're particularly focused on carbon, but we're also interested in biodiversity. How can they have more of a positive impact on the environment than had they never been produced at all? And so we have sort of three key areas where we're sort of, I would say, hijacking value chains in order to try to achieve that final goal of having a positive impact on the environment. So starting at the bottom of my list there, because we're from the ground up, the first thing is tapping into the motivations of people who are already looking for reasons to act. So the first and foremost, I think, is farmers who are already impacted by climate change. As I said, we have evidence that they are wanting to do something. They need to, in many cases, as has been described in the context of India or Benin. We're also looking at people in higher income contexts who are wanting to take action, but maybe don't have, sort of the means available to them. The example I often think of is if you're someone sitting in London, presumably in a flat, you can't exactly plant a tree and absorb carbon yourself, can you? You can avoid certain practices, but there's very little that you can do proactively. So we're interested in activating those people who want to do something tangible. And we're also looking at companies who have carbon targets. There are a number of companies that have goals to reduce carbon emissions and perhaps offset, and we can talk about the complexities around that, but they don't have enough well established initiatives to invest in. The second cornerstone of this is working with evidence-based practices. Of course, I'm going to say that from the academic position, but tackling this issue of greenwashing, we're trying to cut through sort of the well-intentioned language and initiatives and really get down to what actually works. And I think we've heard some great examples of how removing pesticides actually works, right? So, and those statistics that were really helpfully presented put some significance and some margins around how impactful these interventions can be. So what we're doing is we're actually drawing from other people's evidence here. So rather than, this isn't necessarily a project trying to bring in that environmental evidence, but we're working with researchers who have evidence to work with and basically bringing that to farmers and also bringing that to those who are wanting to support farmers. And basically recognize that there are so many sustainable activities that are out there and that have that evidence, but we need to get them in the hands of farmers and ultimately resource them to implement them. And the final thing, and I think this is an important one, and this was touched on in the context of cotton, is we also need to focus on crops that communities actually value. So there are things that might be environmentally beneficial, things that might be economically beneficial, but if these are crops that communities don't ultimately value themselves, then we're sort of fighting an uphill battle and potentially displacing culturally relevant practices. And then the final step in this model that we're working on through the NIBO project is actually translating this to some tangible products. So we're actually producing products and closing off the value chain from farm level and people level to some final products. And I'm going to talk about one of those products to kind of demonstrate what we're doing. And we want those products to be useful, accessible, and also we have a dimension around aesthetic and actually enjoyable. I'm not going to focus that in my time today in the interest of time, but that's something I'm happy to talk about and explore further. So I'll just tie up this discussion by demonstrating how we're working in our pilot series. It's the Ghana series. So how this came about, I talked about the fact that we work with people motivated to act. So we began a partnership with various actors in Ghana who were already working on sustainable agriculture, specifically around shea agroforestry, and I'll talk about shea in a moment. So we had industry partners as well as farmers who had expressed a demand to do something. So we weren't going against the grain. We weren't trying to convince anyone to do something different from what they were wanting to do. What we then did is brought in evidence-based practices. So we've worked with academics at the University for Development Studies based in Northern Ghana who had, well-evidenced interventions that could work in the particular settings for the farmers that we were looking to work with. So we've been introducing shea agroforestry, hedgerows, which we saw an example of earlier today, biochar and organic fertilizer, and beekeeping. And so what we're doing is working with those academics to train up farmers in those areas. But then the last key ingredient is we're then tying this directly to value chain and to products. And so we're working with a local manufacturer that's down there at the bottom, Maltiti. They are a local Ghanaian manufacturer of cosmetics. They were already making those cosmetics, and so we have worked with them to develop a lip balm, a soap, and a body butter. We've brought in this aesthetic element, which I've mentioned. We've worked with artists to kind of create nice packaging and sort of marketing. And just to make sure that I'm still talking about food and agriculture, we're also exploring how we can expand into shea cooking oil. So just to kind of round off the discussion and talk about a concrete crop, as the others have done, I've mentioned that we're working with these partners in Ghana. And what we've done is we've basically narrowed in on a tree crop that has incredible environmental and social benefits. And this is how we get to that question of, can agriculture give back more to the environment and indeed people than it takes away? So for those of you who don't know shea, you probably do. It's probably found in a cosmetic or in as an oil in a food that you've consumed. If you look at those ingredients, I'm sure you'll see it. It's just this incredible tree crop. It's drought tolerant. It's native to West Africa. It sequesters a lot of carbon. And it's also a really good companion to grow alongside crops. So it has a canopy that is good for sheltering crops during high heat, but it also doesn't sort of encroach on their access to sunlight. But it's also incredibly socially beneficial. So first and foremost, it's locally valued. So in the areas in Ghana where we're working, this isn't something that we've introduced. This is a tree that has a long history and heritage. It's also harvested by women. It's seen as a women's crop, whereas men are growing some of the more cash crops. It has potential high economic returns, and it's sort of having a really good moment right now as an alternative to more environmentally damaging oils such as palm oil. And it also has all kinds of health and nutrition benefits. And so this is a really great example of where, if we start from the ground up and we say, what are the crops or trees that have these environmental benefits, have these social benefits, can we then work backwards, to my previous slides, identify people who want to work in those areas, bring in an evidence base for how we can expand and use these crops in creative ways, and then ultimately produce products with the goal, as I said, of ultimately removing carbon from the atmosphere, improving biodiversity, and having all these environmental benefits. So the last thing I'll say is, it's a relatively new project. I mentioned it's been in the making for quite some time, but we sort of soft launch at the end of last year. And what we're trying to do is ultimately build a community around this. So it's not just about a product, it's not just about a particular intervention, even a particular crop, but it's about sharing information and really building the potential of this type of model. So just an appeal to those of you here, if you think this is something that might interest you, we'd welcome you to sign up for our newsletter, where we'll be sharing a lot of content, including some of this aesthetic content that I mentioned that I don't have time to go into, or to join us on our social media channels. These are all links on my slide, but I don't think you'll be able to click on them. So I'm just going to put them in the chat for anyone who wants to check us out. Yesterday we went a bit viral, I think, on Earth Day by sharing a bit of content on our social media. It's been incredibly effective in helping us build our community. So be really grateful. I'm sure all of you on the call are ideal candidates for joining our community because you're interested in these topics. So it would be really great to hear from you and for you to join us. But I'll leave it there and I'll put the links in the chat. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Amanda. Last but not least, I'm incredibly happy to introduce Allie Stankewich, whom I've had the privilege of working alongside at the NGO Thriving Youth Farmers Uganda. Allie has volunteered for over a year with TOFU, supporting our grants, strategic development, and project management. She also now works at CEA Consulting, which is a small climate and ocean-focused philanthropic consultancy doing research, grant making, and strategy work. So over to you, Allie.
Thank you, Adithi, and thank you for the invitation to join this panel and speak with you all this morning. It's been a pleasure to work together at Thriving Youth Farmers of Uganda. So I will just give a quick lay of the land. Are my slides moving with you guys? Hopefully.
Yes, they are.
Super. So yeah, and also thank you to Rajan, Amanda, and Selena for your great presentations so far and your perspectives on pesticide advocacy and development policy and supply chain practice. I think all of these things resonate a lot with what I'll be talking about today, especially bringing all of these higher macro level issues onto a grassroots community-based level. So I graduated from Washington and Lee University in Virginia in the United States in 2023. I double majored in sociology and environmental studies with a minor in poverty and human capability studies. Essentially, I was constantly channeling threads and like cross lines of food security, sustainability, and human health and well-being through these themes, and was very involved with a lot of student organizations and community engagement programs surrounding food, from a sustainability lens on the compost crew and our Environmental Action League into the service role of Campus Kitchen, which bridged us into the community sector. And so when I graduated and went to Uganda through a Fulbright grant, I was primarily teaching English through a cultural exchange and education program. But I knew that there was something more. And I think, as Amanda touched on, like from this ground up perspective, I was a person motivated to act. These issues of food systems and sustainability have always been kind of central to what I want to be doing. And so I was fortunate enough to connect with Thriving Youth Farmers of Uganda on the ground there, and really listened to where they were at as an organization that was established as an NGO in 2022. So only a year and a half or so before I had connected with them. And it was exciting to see the momentum that was being built, but also a lot of the needs, especially capital-wise, financially, and resources and human capital to get their vision off the ground and running. So I was able to connect and become a grant writer and support some project management with them, which I'll get into in a little while. But now I am back in the US. I'm in San Francisco, California, where I'm calling from today, and work for CEA Consulting, primarily doing strategy, research, and grant making for a climate philanthropy consultancy. So we bridge the funders and on the ground impact. And it's been interesting to kind of now sit at this intersection of where the funding is moving and the ecosystem of climate and land use work, combined with my perspectives from the field and from the classroom. So a deeper dive into TOFU, as I'll call it for the rest of the presentation. It is a youth development and sustainable farming organization that operates in the village of Masolita, which is a community in the district of Wakiso, Uganda. So I spent my last 2 years living in Uganda, in the capital city of Kampala, and Wakiso is probably an hour's drive away from there. TOFU has served and empowered youth primarily, as well as its local community, to focus on livelihoods and to focus on environmental stewardship. So they've built a structure of their programming around these 3 pillars of youth development, environmental stewardship, and sustainable farming. And this really matters because Uganda has one of the world's youngest populations, with over 70% of its population being under the age of 30. And At the same time, up to 18 to 20% of its youth between the ages of 15 and 25 are unemployed, which is, confounded by many other factors, including different educational completion rates and gig economies. So the data is hard to track down, but the story is consistent that employment is a challenge, but the agricultural sector in this culture and community of Uganda is critical. So Tofu has kind of met the needs of their community to focus explicitly on gender equity, mentorship, job training, nutrition, public health outreach, as well as strengthening the agricultural technical skills. So through environmental stewardship, they have gotten to transfer knowledge, especially through resilience design and agroecology methods, as Rajan was mentioning earlier. Some of these have been used in practice and successfully providing the tools and techniques to produce food on the farm that Tofu has. And then the third pillar of just sustainable farming, like I've mentioned, has now expanded from food crops in the soil to an aquaculture production, where they're operating 3 large fish ponds and getting to diversify not only the ecological diversity and biodiversity, but also the diversity of livelihood activities for the community. So I wanted to touch on 2 specific examples of resilience design that Martin, Tofu's director and founder, had learned during a hands-on training that he attended in northern Uganda. And it was facilitated to bring agroecology techniques and tools to community leaders and farmers. And now Martin's role has been to spread this into his community, disseminating the knowledge and the skills with hands-on training. So I was really grateful that I got to be part of that process. The first being these A-frames, which you see in the picture on the left. They are simple, accessible surveying tools, which involve 3 pieces of wood or bamboo that are attached in an A shape, and then a weighted string hangs from the top. And so if both feet of the A are on the ground and the string hangs exactly over a midpoint mark on that crossbar that forms the A, farmers can use this to contour lines along hillsides or uneven plots of land to scope out how they will dig swales, which are essentially shallow trenches that intercept the rainwater, slowing it down and letting it infiltrate into the soil rather than running off and taking topsoil with it. And Uganda is in the tropics climate, which means that their seasons are a rainy season and a dry season. And so during dry periods of time, which have been increasingly severe or unpredictable as a result of climate change being so intimately felt in these communities, the trees or the crops are able to access that moisture that has been collected in a water harvesting process through the dry seasons. So Martin and his team at Tofu were able to take sticks that they were able to construct an A with straight from their land. And it's an example that technology does not need to be so advanced to be effective. It's made from resources that this community has access to and demonstrates that they have ownership over making the measurements, drawing the lines, and strategically designing how they want to use their plot of land in a resilient way. And I think this brought my mind back to the quote of "do the best you can with what you've got." This came up so many times in my time living in Uganda, in resource-constrained areas where it does not need to stop the innovation, the creativity, or the effective approaches to being more sustainable with your practice. Another example, and I think this is a great building off point from the conversation thus far this afternoon on pesticides, because Martin also brought back an idea for an organic fish emulsion pesticide. This serves as a fertilizer or a pesticide to add to your crops by taking fish byproducts that are broken down through fermentation, mixed with a sweet, either molasses or brown sugar to serve as a carbon source. And then often, I think he also added citrus peels to balance the pH. And this fermented over several weeks. And then when I got to the farm and met with all of them, the material had liquefied for the most part, and we strained it through, ready to be diluted with a water balanced to apply to the crops during the active periods. So fish is a staple protein source in the diets of Ugandans, and there were fish producers just up the road where Tiofu had collected the byproducts from, and then leveraged that at scale for pesticides for their farm. So again, this is using what they have and making the most of it. And it's tangible because it's effective cost-wise, right? It's not needing to be distributed from far away or imported from other countries and producers. And it was a tool and technique that I had never seen in my prior work in the US, gardening or working in food systems. And so it was multi exchange of learning, and really cool just to see that these practices are being adopted, they are being used effectively. And I think the knowledge exchange was so powerful in that moment. So I also, I'm going to quickly just zoom out again on how I really wanted to frame my approach to working with the community. I think, I've always seen food as a connector of people, culture, and our environment. This is universal. So while I had had extensive experience in the past working in food spaces through community work, volunteering, academic engagements, being in Uganda meant that I had to do a lot of listening and a lot of learning. The community's deep roots and insights were the engine behind the goals that we set and the work that we got to do together. And so I really prioritized this listening piece, spending time with Tiofu's leadership team, understanding their priorities, understanding what they had achieved as an organization before I arrived. They know their problems best and also had the ideas for solutions. And so it was a matter of catalyzing resources and like capacity to build something. So through understanding cultural dynamics, having lived in Uganda for over a year by that point in time, recognizing that we would go and find the chairman of the village to get his blessing before launching our project, working with gender roles and understanding that women are the backbone of the agricultural sector, yet have very little access to land tenure in many cases. So we made an explicit effort to involve women as well as men in our efforts for building a fish pond, and letting it be local ownership that drove the planning and the operations. So this project has gotten to continue well beyond my time there. As I'm back in the US, it's great getting updates from Tiofu and realizing that once people trusted and invested in the process, it was theirs to own and to sustain. So some of the ways that I got to support Tiofu was in securing a grant to develop the fish pond. I really want to highlight that this meant we had to focus not just on impact, but also on the sustainability of it. So I was able to brainstorm to lay out a plan, establish a budget, figure out where and from who we would procure the materials for this project, which I really leaned heavily on local experts for. And then most valuably, who in the community would be on the team doing this work. We brought on a contractor who is an aquaculture expert working for a local aquaculture company, and he supported us from start to finish in planning the land, in digging the ponds, in sourcing the fish fingerlings from a hatchery, and really ensuring that quality happened early to provide longevity of the work. We also negotiated with hardware stores about the right pipes and equipment. We found we were loading fish in plastic jugs from the hatchery, traveling on the back of motorcycles for well over an hour on bumpy dirt roads to get to the farm. But all of these moments meant that local experts got to be championed. We made sure they were compensated fairly. And once the fish arrived at the pond and we actually started the whole operation, it was a moment of joy and gratitude and real excitement of just how we got to see the end-to-end process happen. So here are a few pictures I was able to take of making the measurements, of putting all of these fish in the jugs to be traveling back to the farm site, of setting the nets to prevent birds or other pests from invading, and then getting to see the final work with some of our coworkers on the field. So I would just like to also kind of talk through some of the challenges I think exist for just sustainability. I see sustainability as inextricably connected to environmental justice and social justice, but this is also, of course, where a lot of challenges do come up. And I think oftentimes, especially in emerging economies like Uganda, finance and investment are a great barrier to agriculture. There's prohibitively high interest rates and an inability to secure land titles or insurance, especially for certain populations like women or youth. So youth are often trapped into lower productivity farming or prevented from entry altogether. Land access can be challenging as well. Often these structures, land is inherited or controlled by older generations. So if we're thinking about getting youth's involvement in agriculture, navigating generational barriers or cultural norms is necessary. But there's other systems like renting land or insecure land that is just expensive or difficult to invest in for longer term practices, which might be a reason why they're not always happening. And then, of course, climate risks, and in many parts of the developing world where systems are volatile, droughts, floods, unpredictable rain patterns are constantly increasing, and soil is degrading or yields are declining. It's hard to get started. It's also hard to plan and to adapt without the proper education and knowledge and tools to do so. So sometimes if we're thinking about, great, like there's food in a place, but is it sustainable? And most importantly, is it just? Other kind of macro level things are the aid and philanthropy model that has tended to fund discrete projects rather than systemic projects. So if we're thinking about institutional change, political change that has to happen, if we're thinking about the policy making that Rajan mentioned earlier, or the supply chains that Selena has talked about, right? This requires much more transformation than just one discrete project at a time. There's also a technology bias that new inputs or apps or techniques might be overestimated if you're not addressing them in the context of accessibility to them or sensitization or the power structures. So one example is we wanted to do knowledge sharing and share presentations with Tofu's community, but there wasn't the infrastructure of even a projector or a place to plug it in or a building to do so in. So we had to be creative, right? We had to figure out how to gather communities, how to bring people together, and to do activities with a Blackboard, with, written tools, with acting it out. We played a lot of games and charades to talk about what it meant to run a fish pond, to interact with your nutrition, to interact with resilience in agroecology practices. And it was fun to do so, but differences in technology inputs meant that you just have to adapt what your outputs will be. And then the urban-rural political divide is something that I think in many African societies is present for smallholder farmers in rural communities. They are primarily the ones producing the food, but they are strapped to the pressures from urban consumers or exports internationally in terms of pricing. And so the labor and the prices for compensation for farmers is often unjust. And so that's another thing just to be mindful of as we think about just transitions to food systems. I shared this earlier that women comprise over 80% of the agricultural workforce in Uganda, yet only 16 to 27% own land. And so this is definitely an area for attention to be driving investment and capital and safety for women to have more ownership over the land and to be able to regenerate ecological systems like soil health and water cycles and biodiversity. Climate adaptation will have to be an immediate priority, and we can't do this unless gender is part of the architecture rather than just an add-on. And so I want to kind of offer a few specific ideas to what gender-informed transition could look like. This means formalizing and protecting women's land access to ensure sustainability programs don't displace vulnerable communities, making women's labor visible and valued. Tofu has been a great leader of this in their community. And I think the more that their work gets to grow and just gain visibility will be critical to start to snowball that effect into other community spaces as a norm rather than an exception. Increasing women's representation in decision-making will also be valuable, shifting from more than just access, but power. And working with, not against, cultural systems, of course. This is what will make the transformation durable, socially embedded, and not imposed. So yeah, we have to think about these from the perspectives of local governments, grassroots advocacy, corporate commitments, and then the research data, and ultimately a narrative change. And then in the context of Africa, I think Tiofu has been a leader in investing in youth and rural livelihoods, and this is critical. There are broken and fragmented markets, high transport costs and post-harvest losses cut into people's income in significant ways and amplify risk. We have to prioritize adaptation and then scale these agroecological approaches, which are really exciting. And I'm hopeful that Tiofu will get to be a leader in drawing more attention to these options. And then again, securing land rights and shifting smallholders' positions in the greater system. So I will stop there, but thank you all so much. And I encourage you to check out Tiofu's website, which I'm also happy to share a link to in the chat. And just to continue to support its work and its vision to really bring them into practice. As a young organization in Africa, getting visibility through the grant making and the fundraising has been essential.
Thanks so much, Allie. That was an incredibly insightful presentation. We are nearing the end of the seminar. We do just have a couple of minutes left, so I might just ask a few questions just to round up the conversations, and any of the speakers, you're more than welcome to jump in and answer. But one of the questions that I had just listening to all of you guys is that from your perspective, what would you say is the most urgent shift that's needed today to make agricultural systems truly sustainable? I know it's quite a broad question, but if you could maybe pick one thing that you could change to make agricultural systems more sustainable, what would it be? Yeah, Amanda.
I can jump in. I would say this because I'm an economist. Sorry, I didn't say my background, but I think it's really crucial that the kind of the intervention, the scientific intervention, if you will, or the agroeconomic intervention is really locally adapted. Like there is no, whether it's irrigation, whether it's pesticide use. I mean, there are things that are, broadly applicable, but they really need to be adapted to local context. And some of the research I've worked on, farmers have saying, even within a national context, we talked about like the lack of extension workers, is that what works at a national, there is no national one intervention even. I've worked a bit on environmental information services where farmers are told when the rains are going to come or, what have you. And if those are not down to the, really local level, then they're kind of meaningless. So sorry, I'm kind of skirting your question before then I say I do think the economics of it really matter. I mentioned in my presentation that poverty is a really significant barrier. So we can give farmers all the tools in the world, but if they don't have the resources to implement them, then they just can't. But also the value chain. So you can produce more food. You can, and all of you, I think, mentioned higher yields. But if we don't know how those higher yields convert to some kind of output that brings a farmer an income, that can be an issue. So if everybody produces more of one product in a local economy, the cost of that product will go down. So you could actually leave farmers either the same or even worse off. And so that would be my answer, though recognizing I'm biased as an economist, that I guess the market linkages really matter as well as local adaptation.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Amanda. Do any of the other speakers have anything to add? Yeah,
I
Selena.
could complement that actually. I mean, I'm also an economist. I would also say access to resources is the most important limiting factor when it comes to production. But our experience from India, if you can pick one resource from the lot of resources, it is water. So water in the field, I mean, a farm pond or a well, and then water management practices so that they can actually extend the limited available water for all the crops they have throughout the season. And that we have seen has actually significant benefits. It's not only actually, that particular crop gets water, then they have water to grow some other crops, which are actually, according to the agroecological practices, they have to have a cover crop, they have to have a natural habitat for protection of conservation of biodiversity. For all of that, actually, it helps. And then generally, it helps the stress within the agriculture household. So I would say water, but, in general, access to more resources, but water. And this is what farmers would tell you too, like if you ask them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Selena. Rajan?
Thanks. Well, yeah, it is a tough question because the food and agricultural system is a complex system. I was going to say, I think that diversification is one of the key aspects here. We need to move away from a model where we can produce just produce one crop in a certain area, and sometimes there's government intervention to try and promote a single crop, and that's actually generally not going to be good for individual farmers. We know that farmers worldwide are operating on tight margins, and if we focus on just single crops, then become very vulnerable to climate change, and we lose resilience. So that's one aspect, and it would needs kind of policy intervention, but it also needs a bit of change in buyer and consumer behavior to be able to accept to use different crops, and maybe rely less on just wheat and soy and corn, but actually accept some secondary crops that have been diminished in importance in recent years.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rajan. Allie, any parting words of wisdom?
I would, absolutely echo all three things that you've said, everybody. I think kind of the resilience is what continues to come to my mind. I think a lot of climate work, for the most part, especially where funders are focused, is in the mitigation. But the reality is, like, on the ground, like, things are changing, right? Water patterns are changing, soil health is changing, the types of crops that are able to grow are changing, and for communities to look into the future, like, they have to be prepared to be adapting but resilient to where these changes are happening. And so I think, yes, I'm excited by even the work that Tofu has been able to do at a super small level, of great. They've built a well and they've been able to generate like a little bit of water harvesting in their plot of land. It's not much, but I think it's the model that now, the more that this narrative shift happens on strategic communication, I think that that's one other element of this, like, to complement the economic lens, to complement the science, to complement the policy. It's like getting people to care. And it's Climate Week in San Francisco right now, and I've talked to so many people who are just like really trying to figure out, like, how do we elevate this to get people to care? Because at the bottom line of financing it, you need people to invest. The bottom line of like growing a grassroots movement, you need people to like want to build that power. And so the storytelling elements, the creative ways to share a narrative, more than just data in a report, more than just like a policy brief, is going to be critical, I think, in this movement moving forward too.